Right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on securing Python and open source ecosystems. We're about safeguarding trust in public repositories. Uh, Today, we're going to go through a couple of housekeeping things before we get started here. We'll host polls throughout the webinar, and we'll ask for your feedback, so you'll see those on there. As always, we'll be emailing everybody the slides after the webinar is complete, so you'll have a copy of everything that we show here. And you can submit your questions in the Q&A tab and we'll answer those in the end. So there's a little Q&A tab, you can just submit them there and we'll get to those. We'll have a section at the end for question and answer. So we'll go over a quick, the kind of material we're going to cover here today in our webinar. So we've got, we'll talk a little bit about introduction to supply chain security overall, some of the current initiatives that are going on in the public ecosystems, what the future of repository security looks like. We'll do a technical demo of trusted publishing, which is one of the new features that's been launched in the last year or so and extended just recently. And then we'll have time for Q&A overall. So today, just a quick intro. I'm Pete Garson, Director of Product here at ActiveState. And joining me for a thrilling chat here today is Dustin Ingram, who's a fellow at the Python Software Foundation and also a staff engineer at Google on their open source security team, where he works improving the security of open source software that Google and the rest of the world relies on, and maintainer of the Python package index. So welcome, Dustin.
Hey, thanks, Pete. Great to be here.
All right, so I guess what we can do is we can just get into it here, and I'm gonna stop sharing my slides so that we're not tiny little boxes on the screen for everybody, and just sort of talk a little bit about, get into our first subject, which is just talking about what is software supply chain security, overall, and maybe we can start a little bit about, just give us give us a little bit of a breakdown of, what's is software supply chain, what is the software supply chain, and what role do public repositories play in that software supply chain?
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's start with this, the role, right? So PyPI was created to create this like centralized repository, and we've seen that reproduced over and over again, right? Most language ecosystems, not all, but most have a centralized software repository. And this makes it really easy to know where to go and get software for your ecosystem. So this supply chain security, when we think about the supply chain, it's everyone that's involved in producing the software that you consume. And this goes down so many levels, right? And I think this is not news to anyone. I think most people who are using open source or even not using open source, they have a supply chain. There are people involved in every stage. Software is getting repackaged, redistributed, vendored into other packages, things like that. And it all sort of ends up then in production in your system, right? And so supply chain security is just sort of thinking about all the risk that comes with that many people touching everything that ends up in production for you. What does that mean? How do you mitigate that risk?
Yeah, and that's, I think, maybe something that some people don't even realize, right? Is that, you know, they might think, oh, I'm adding, I need to use this library to make my website or to make my application, and they don't realize just how many things it might be bringing into their program and how far-reaching that sort of um, uh, those dependencies and the whole scale of what the software supply chain looks like. What are some of the risks, like you mentioned there about, all the risks that brings? What are some of the risks in the whole software supply chain that maybe people aren't aren't thinking about regularly?
Yeah, I would say one is just the really wide-ranging levels of quality that you get in open source, right? Because one of the goals of open source is to make it possible for anyone to publish anything. And there are no barriers, or we try to reduce barriers to publishing generally, right? There are examples where that's not true for like certain Linux distributions. It's a high barrier to entry. It's hard to go and whip your own package there. But that's not true for most language ecosystems. So I think the thing that's important to think about with that is that I think a lot of users have an expectation of everything they consume from PyPI is always going to be super high quality. But in reality, you get a mix. You get a mix of stuff that's supported by large software foundations, for-profit companies, all the way down to the hobbyist dev, right? Who might not have bandwidth to provide the same level of care and support as those other organizations might, which is not a
Yeah,
bad thing, by the way.
no, it isn't. But I think it's more just something that people need to be aware of, right? Is that,
Absolutely.
like you're saying, you've got the big, huge, projects supported by different foundations who might have, sophisticated, infrastructure for, providing builds to you, or, for, looking after vulnerabilities that, they might even have some people who are staff, who are working on this kind of like, professionally, versus, the hobbyist who, you know, might definitely probably doesn't have the budget to do that kind of thing. And, they might not even have a consistent build environment or something that they're using. They just build it on their laptop and are publishing it that way. So
Yeah.
there's, like you said, there's a pretty wide range there. What are the when people talk about like supply chain security though, what are we really securing against? What are some of the types of attacks that, and the risks that people are, potentially going to encounter when you're dealing with this kind of thing?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's a couple different classes of attacks here that people should be aware of, and maybe not just attacks, but just let's think of them as risks, right? So
Yeah.
there's everything around vulnerabilities. So software is almost never perfect. So there's always going to potentially be bugs or vulnerabilities. And so the risk here is like there's a vulnerability that makes you susceptible to risk, additional risk, or there's a bug that's going to cause, you lose business income or something like that as a result of it. So um, being finding those bugs quickly, fixing them, being aware when and where they exist, what the effect of them is, whether you're actually affected by it or if the CD is like just really slow, it's you use. Another one is just sort of like malicious actors in the supply chain, right? So there's a couple of different opportunities for people to, um, you know, uh, somehow like change what you're receiving when you think you're getting a legitimate open source package. So that might be like an account takeover or a typo squat or malware or something like that you've been tricked to installing, right? And maybe we can talk a little bit more about those later because there's like different levels of impact for some of those things. But yeah, another is just, we saw, and obviously like XC is the most recent and possibly the most relevant thing here to discuss, is like there are things that weren't being checked or we weren't looking out for that could have potentially identified that sooner. Uh, and there's a variety of causes like ultimately led to that almost being successful attack. But yeah, there's a really wide range.
Yeah, so that's I mean, that's definitely an interesting one, obviously, with XE, like, because there's kind of there's multiple layers, I think, to the type of attack that it was, kind of thing. Do you want to talk a little bit about high level for those maybe who aren't fully up on it? What's the summary in terms of, what almost got through there?
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll take a step back and just sort of talk about like this balance between impact and frequency, right? So
Sure,
like
yeah.
we have these kinds of attacks I mentioned that are like malware, typo squatting. I call those low impact, high frequency. They happen like all the time. They generally aren't affecting the average user, right? They almost don't affect any users at all, but they generate a lot of press and stuff. We have like medium impact stuff where like someone's domain expires for their email address and then an attacker can take it over and then take over their account and then publish something bad. That's a little more frequent, a little more impactful as well. So there's things we do to avoid that. And then there's like this high impact stuff that like almost never happens, but was like would be super bad if it happened. When XE is an example of that. So the 30,000 foot version of that attack was someone that had a lot of resources, created a sock puppet, basically pretended to be someone that they weren't. And that person that they were pretending to be was a really helpful open source maintainer that came along to help out a project called XC that needed support. Its maintainer was burnt out, needed help. And for like 2 years, they did basically world-class open source, like a stellar example of being a good open source contributor, with the exception of they were slowly introducing a backdoor into this library. with the goal of taking over like SSH sessions that would have been like really widely distributed across lots of Linux distributions. So yeah, we think it didn't get used for a couple different reasons, but had it made it through, would have been really bad. Uh, where we got lucky was that it was found early. Where we didn't get lucky was it was kind of found accidentally, right? Like the person who found it wasn't looking for security issues. They weren't really even looking at that library in particular. They just happened to notice something seemed a little bit off. So yeah, like all of the security apparatus we have around so many things just totally miss this, right? Part of the reason is because it's a hard attack to detect, but yeah, could have been really bad.
Yeah, it's definitely challenging. Do you think like are these are they evolving over time? Like, has it gone from, something simple like typo squatting where somebody, types the name of some popular thing off by one or something like that, like where that's a fairly low sophistication attack versus something like this, like you said, where it's like a person who's they're well resourced and it's a kind of a very long play as well to get this
Yeah.
in here. So are you guys seeing increasing sophistication in the attacks?
So I mean, things are definitely changing, right? There kind of didn't used to be malware on PyPI. That just wasn't a thing that happened. We had very little reports of malware. We took down very little malware even just a couple of years ago. That was like not a big deal. Now it's like a large percentage of our time as volunteers and administrators of the package index is just taking down stuff. And honestly, like I think, like I said, I don't think those attacks are very successful usually. I think it's people just being script kiddies, trying to collect bug bounties, like that kind of thing. But it's just not a valid use of PyPI. Things like XZ, right? Like this is an attack. I don't know if I'd say we could see it evolved because it's so unique and it's kind of unlike anything we've seen before. We've kind of always suspected that something like this was possible, right? That people could be sock puppets or be malicious maintainers, just things like that. But we've never really found anything like this. So that's interesting because it does kind of, the attack was bad, but what it means is that someone that is that resourced, an attacker like that, didn't find another avenue to do this, right? They had to kind of do this in public, mostly in public. They had to do the sock puppet thing, right? So it was kind of like they couldn't find vulnerabilities, they couldn't find bugs that they could exploit. So this was the potentially the best thing, or maybe the cheapest thing that they decided they could do. So that's kind of like you could look at that from a perspective of
That's
that
the
being a good
upside.
thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's the
exactly.
bright side there. Yeah. Yeah.
The downside is it was surprisingly easy for them to get away with this, or almost get away with it. So that I think is a area where we have room for improvement because I do think we'll probably see more things like this in the future. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, what about you know, how how important do you think it is for organizations to kind of uh invest in this kind of in protecting their supply chain? Do you think like do you think that they're taking it serious? Like, do you think people are even aware of this kind of thing? Like, if like you said at the beginning, a lot of people have this kind of implicit trust in what's out there on the internet.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the ideal case is that we would treat every like third party library that we use as it's our own code. Like we would do code reviews on it. We would provide, developer support for it and just achieve the same bar for quality that we would for our own code base. In reality, I don't think pretty much anybody does that, right? They kind of, like you said, blindly kind of accept what exists in open source. And what sort of happens is we sort of let that for other people to do the work for us, right? And often it sort of falls between the cracks. So yeah, I think it's really important for organizations to make bigger investments here because I think we were able to skate by on just blindly trusting for a little while, but we really need to treat source third-party code that you're integrating into your production system or whatever it might be as it's your own, right? Provide scrutiny, provide support, that kind of thing.
And is there anything, with an organization like Google at the scale there, is there anything, sort of unique that Google approaches supply chain security?
Yes, Google is very unique in a lot of senses, but I think specifically in the way we consume open open source software is particularly unique. So I think a lot of people know that Google operates on a mono repo. This isn't true for 100% of the things that we do, but it's largely true. And then what this means is that monorepo in our monorepo, we actually have copied and pasted basically every third-party dependency that we need. We have a whole directory that's called third party, and that's just literally everything. And the monorepo also means we have single versions for all these things too. And so if we have like two production systems, like let's say Gmail and YouTube, they both depend on some Python library. They're both going to be using the same. I'm oversimplifying significantly here, but the idea is two services would be using the same version. What this means is we're only really ever using one version of a dependency at a time, which is nice for a bunch of reasons, right? So when something like XC happens, we can pretty quickly know what we're using and where it's being used. And then the other thing is, and this is sometimes a bit of a downside, is that there's a bit of a delay there, right? We can't immediately upgrade to the latest version. Sometimes we expedite it if there's a security bug or vulnerability. Usually it just slowly gets upgraded. And so again, in a case like XZ, we might not even be on an affected version because we might be a couple of versions behind because it takes so much effort to go and upgrade all these services that use this library. So it's kind of like it's a bit of a trade-off for us. And there are a lot of other downsides for that model. I wouldn't say that I would advise most companies to try and emulate Google like this. Google has some unique problems here that we're trying to solve with that. I think for the average organization, things like pin dependencies, especially hash pinning, can go a really long way to preventing a lot of attacks. And then also integrating vulnerability scanning and advisory analysis into your pipeline somewhere so that you know as fast as possible if there is an attack and if you're affected by it.
Yeah, I think that just having, a layer of observability into knowing what versions you're running inside your organization and, knowing where they're running, you know what I mean, is at the highest level is probably step one in terms of being able to tackle this kind of problem. In terms of just before we wrap up this section, in terms of on the Python package index, is there a recent, obviously you guys are saying you're targeted from typo squatting or anything. Is there any recent attacks that like stood out to you in terms of what somebody tried to target PyPI with?
Yeah, so like I said, always getting reports of malware. I think it's actually improving. We're getting a lot faster at responding to it, which is great, and bunch of reasons why that's getting better. Um, I think the other interesting thing, we recently had a pretty widespread account takeover attack. Um, so we sort of see this from time to time, like I mentioned, if someone has a personal domain and that expires, register the domain, take over the email, take over the account. Usually those are pretty limited. Like I think in the past we'd only had like one or two users affected by. Sometimes that's a leaked password. So one thing we did at the beginning of the year is we required two-factor authentication for all accounts. So that's really cut down on the potential for this kind of attack. That's the main reason we did it, is because those are just too common. It also protects against phishing and things like that. And it cuts down on support for us in terms of having to deal with account takeovers. But what we saw recently was that there was an account takeover attack. Oh, the other thing that we do also that prevents account takeover is we integrate with Have I Been Pwned, which is a really great service. And
Yeah.
basically, every time PyPI sees your password, we hash it and we send it to this external service, or we send a portion of it to this external service, and it will tell us if that password has appeared in a breach. If it has, we just don't let you log in. So if right now, let's say an online service that I use, all the passwords are leaked and the service picks up on it, and I reuse that password for PyPI, then it would immediately invalidate and prevent an account takeover. And so what we saw recently, and this was just like a month or two ago, is we had a bunch of account takeovers, like more than 100. They were all for accounts that had not set up two-factor authentication yet. And they were all passwords that the Have I Been Pwned service did not know about. So our suspicion was that this was a new breach that they had not found yet, and they were really quickly using it to try and target PyPI accounts. We made a big change. No, not a big change. We made a change to sort of mitigate this. So now, if you don't have two-factor authentication set up, you have to revalidate your email address you are logging in and don't have 2FA. So what this means is that an attacker would also have to control the email address, and that just adds another level of barrier to takeover. And I think that would have really helped probably all of the cases here. What we found was that no projects were published, nothing malicious was released. It was sort of trying all the keys and seeing if any of them open doors kind of situation.
Right.
But yeah, that was pretty significant that we saw recently.
Yeah, that's a really good spot for us to we'll switch over to our next topic here. Maybe I'll do a quick poll here among folks. But yeah, which is talking about some of the initiatives for balancing security and usability and what the repositories are doing right now to mitigate that, like adding two-factor. So maybe though, before we move on here, we'll show the poll here about just to check, about currently, does your organization, if you're in attendance here, allow packages to be pulled directly from, public repositories? We talked a little bit at the start, are there no restrictions? You might have some, but there's like rules about what's in place, or, we don't allow this at all. So we'll give everyone just a second to vote there, just to see what it's like. And then we'll sort of move forward with our next section here. All right, so that's probably, hopefully, maybe everybody's voted by now. I don't know if we can see the results there. Right, so for the most part, people have some restrictions and rules in place. About half of everyone. Basically, very few have unlimited, no restrictions kind of thing. And then, some that say we don't allow any pulling whatsoever, and a fair number who don't know actually right now. So I think that sort of yeah, speaks to what we were talking about a little bit earlier. So I'm going to go back. We can go back to our full size windows here, and let's pick up where we left off about, you were talking about two-factor, and what you guys are working on to improve the security. We talked a little bit about, steps to enhance security. Are there how do maybe partnerships like the ones that with GitHub and ActiveState and GitLab, Google, like how do those type of things enhance some of the security that you guys are trying to enact there?
Yeah, the partnerships are super important. Obviously, PyPI has a bunch of partnerships with our in-kind sponsors who provide us with infrastructure resources. Fastly is a huge one here. Fastly's been a great partner. It just enabled PyPI to exist, period. Those are all really super important, and I have to call them out. We also have other integrations. So like I said, well, I didn't say actually, we have partnerships with GitHub to do secret scanning. So for example, if you commit your PyPI API token to GitHub, it will immediately get revoked on PyPI automatically without you doing anything. You'll just get a friendly email saying it doesn't work anymore. And so that's because they scan everything and have integrated with our secret reporting integration. And I believe there's more to come soon there. I think we may actually be working on something that works the opposite way. So if you commit a secret to PyPI for a cloud provider like
Right.
State or something like that, we'll revoke your token for you. We have a lot of partnerships now with trusted publishing. That started with GitHub and has now expanded to include GitLab, Google, and ActiveState, of course. And so that's really great. And we'll talk more about trusted publishing, I think, but just enabling more secure publication and some other nice things to go along with how maintainers are publishing with PyPI. Other partnerships include, we collaborate kind of like industry wide with the OpenSSF, which is the Open Software Security Foundation. It's a lot of large organizations and also small software foundations like the PSF collaborate there to come up with new security standards, direct funding to security initiatives and that kind of thing. And it's really a critical partnership between all those organizations, and also respond to things like when attacks like XC happen, get everyone on the same page and share notes. And then there's also like I said, I mentioned the folks that donate resources to things like PyPI. There are also investment by a lot of important partners via sponsorship of the PSF, and that allows us to do interesting things like the trusted publishing work. So to toot my own horn, that was my team that funded a lot of the development work on that and enabled PyPI to do it. But for active state, the integration there, that was funded by the active state as well. And then, other financial support as well allows to do things like CPython developer in residence, PyPI security and safety engineer, these roles that we've just created due to financial support from these organizations who are great partners. This help enable us to continue to respond to threats, mitigate risk, and all those kind of things.
Great. Maybe let's chat a little bit about trusted publisher. This is something obviously, that we'll demo here later on. We've been sort of working together on that for the last year or so, getting that integrated. Maybe give us the sort of, the high level tour of, what trusted publishing is on PyPI and, sort of why it exists.
Yeah. So the ultimate goal with trusted publishing is to remove the need for long-lived secrets and for those secrets to be shared with third parties in order to publish the PyPI. So before this existed, the status quo was you did one of two things. One, you created an API token and you added that to your like GitHub Actions, secrets, or something like that. And that's what you used. You used the same API token every time you published. Or you published from a computer in your closet or from your laptop or something like that. And
Right.
you typed your password in possibly to do that. So both of those are bad for a couple of reasons. One, we kind of just generally want to get rid of passwords or just authenticating with just passwords because they can be phished. Um, and and we also want to enable 2FA, which is hard in automated systems. And then with API tokens, right? Like API tokens are great. They can be very widely scoped, so they live forever. Like they don't expire generally. We've talked about adding expiring API tokens, but they also like sometimes they could be used to publish other things. There's account-wide API tokens for PyPI. And then, yeah, sharing them externally. Like there are many examples of token leak on CI providers and things like that over the years. So it's dangerous, right? Because once that token is out, someone could, if you don't have a secret scanning partner and it's just in an attacker's hands, they can go and publish whatever they want, right? So our goal is to get rid of those kind of attack vectors. And the way we do this with trusted publishing, we use a open standard called OIDC, OpenID Connect. This is a decentralized authentication protocol. Basically, entities like ActiveState or Google or GitHub are identity providers. They provide you with a verifiable token that verifies your identity, and then you can go and exchange that for other things. So the most common thing that you might imagine is your Google account, right? There, you can get an OpenID token for your Google account, but this becomes really powerful when we think about things like GitHub Actions. Each individual run of a GitHub action having a unique identity, so then we know exactly where that request is coming from when we want to publish. So it enables users to sort of publish after authenticating with these identities rather than API tokens or passwords. And behind the scenes, there's some other nice things as well that sort of give you some extra security benefits.
Yeah, and I think that it also, allows you to streamline the workflow a little bit as well, like for users being able to publish directly from something like GitHub or ActiveState, rather than, having to, like you said, type in your password or whatever in the old way. Are there any sort of balances in sort of like the usability or the contributor experience in terms of, uh when you're thinking about this is like, what are the sort of trade-offs in terms of security? So obviously 2FA is kind of like an additional layer of thing that you have to go through. Was there a lot of pushback on 2FA when it got rolled out? And yeah, and just in terms of trusted publishing, and how do you balance the sort of like usability side with the security?
Yeah, I think so. Well, let's start with 2FA and then we talk about trusted publishing. So with 2FA, there was a bit of pushback. I think it was mostly in how we were rolling out the requirements. So now that we've essentially said everyone has to use 2FA, it's a little more fair, I think. And yeah, there was a bit of pushback on. I don't want to, TOTP is annoying to use, right? When you do the authenticator app on your phone, I hate doing it. And every website that doesn't support WebAuthn, I'm like, oh, why aren't you there yet? Right? It's so much easier and it's so simple to just use a security key, use WebAuthn in your browser. Passkeys is what Apple calls those basically. So those are just so simple to use that I think it's easier than typing a password. I guarantee it is. So I think some of those arguments are not as strong. Requirements that people need to use their mobile device don't exist because if you do choose to TOTP, you can do that with a lot of password managers and things like that. But I think the user experience there, there's one small extra step. The benefit is huge though, right? It really prevents, it does eliminate account takeovers, and it also really reduces the support burden for PyPI in the event of account takeover. So benefit there is good for long-term sustainability. For trusted publishing, I think it's a little bit easier actually. The amount of configuration necessary is about the same, right? You need to tell PyPI which provider you want to trust. So you configure some details about active state, and I think we'll see this in the demo. But this is like a little bit more typing than creating an API token, but you only do it once, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then the usability is really nice too, because you don't deal with passwords, secrets, and third parties. And then a lot of the Python tooling has also been able to pick up on these secrets or these OIDC identities automatically. So like if you just don't give it a password, things like Twine and other tools it'll just work, which is really nice, nice user experience.
That's great. Well, that's probably a good spot for us. We're going to move into the future here in a second, but we'll do one more poll here in between for the folks watching. And so, like, for those who are in attendance, what's describes your interest in securing public repositories here? Are you concerned about supply chain attacks? Is that why you're here? Are you concerned about how it relates to your company policies? How you can contribute to making open source safer overall? Or are you just kind of curious in community initiatives? So give you everyone a second here to answer those before we move on. And then yeah, maybe we'll take a look at the results here and see what folks is are most interested in. So for the 80%, pretty much everybody is concerned about software supply chain attacks. So that's not that surprising, and also about how it's relating to their company policies in terms of, as we saw earlier, about people having restrictions on what they can pull from a public repo. So that's yeah, that's probably not that surprising. And so maybe let's go here to sort of wrap up our chat before we get to the demo to talk a little bit about the future of repository security. So what's the roadmap? What are some things that are on the horizon for for PyPI, and what are the next challenges to tackle for on the security front?
Yeah, so maybe I'll talk a little bit about what I imagine, and this is just my opinion, really, what the future for PyPI holds, and I have some signals that can probably help make that prediction. And then I think PyPI is a little ahead of the curve here, actually. So maybe I'll also talk about what other ecosystems I think should be doing
Sure.
based on what we've learned. So for PyPI, like I said, we've done a 2FA mandate. We now have trusted publishing and a lot of integrations with one of the main places where people are publishing from. I think the next thing here is around build provenance and attestations. So I'm currently working on PEP 740. If you're familiar with the Python ecosystem, PEPs are our Python enhancement protocols. It's an RFC, request for comment like process, where we create new standards, and then those standards are approved, and then they become part of the way that everything works. So PEP 740 is the index support for digital attestations. And what this will enable is for maintainers of Python packages to be able to publish verifiable attestations about the artifacts that they're publishing. And this is a sort of a general approach. We're very close to getting this accepted. We actually just crossed a big milestone yesterday. But this will allow people to make these kind of general attestations. So this could be, if you've heard of SigStore, this could be software signing with SigStore. This could be build provenance with Salsa or something that's similar to Salsa. And basically, this also uses OIDC to sort of verify the identities that are generating these attestations. So really nice, sort of builds on top of work that we've already done. My ulterior motive here in getting attestations is I really want attestations to be available to anyone because I think that will unlock something that's really interesting. So if you're familiar with the Rust ecosystem, they have a tool called Cargo Vet, and this doesn't really work on attestations right now. But what it is organizations like Mozilla will publish essentially like vets. They will review the third-party code that they use and they publish what they find. And they say, yeah, we reviewed this and we're using this internally and we think it's good. And the idea is that you can sort of aggregate those to get a good, strong signal of what other people have done to evaluate risk for open source. So attestations would sort of enable anyone to make those sort of claims and you to evaluate who has said what and whether you trust them and then what you want to do with that, what they've said. It also, I think we don't talk too much about reproducibility in the Python ecosystem, but I do think there's an interesting feature here around reproducibility, and attestations are related to that as well, right? So if an organization like ActiveState was rebuilding everything on PyPI and they were successfully able to reproduce things, it would be a really strong signal, right? If they were able to say, yes, we can prove and verify that we've reproduced this package on our own build system and you get the exact same result, especially given something like XZ, where ultimately the attack was affected by the maintainer sort of sneakily inserting something between the build and the publish step. Reproducibility really helps mitigate that, right? Because you'll immediately see a difference. So yeah, I think long-term focusing on attestations is on the near horizon, focusing on reproducibility and general attestations on the long, farther down the road.
Yeah, I think I mean, that's something that we're definitely very focused on here. It is that, I mean, we effectively are rebuilding the entire Python ecosystem in our catalog and in a reproducible and verifiable way. So that the idea, I would imagine that being able to publish, like you said, attestations or provenance alongside something on PyPI would make it verifiable to any third party. So any user would be able to, which is going to enhance the security of everything because now like we talked about right at the beginning, now that this wasn't just made on somebody's laptop in their closet or whatever, right? You can say, "Oh, this was built in this particular way. It's compliant with this standard." And we know that we can also, like you said, reproduce it you know, in a predictable way so that we know that it's more secure. So I think that's great to hear that PEP 740 is close to being
Well,
accepted.
yeah, definitely. And the other thing I should have mentioned too, with trusted publishing and attestations is it allows you to kind of go up your supply chain, right? It allows you to go back to the source. So especially with trusted publishing, a lot of projects are on GitHub. Um, Now with trusted publishing, we know exactly what GitHub repository, what run of a workflow, which workflow it was published from. So that information is not serviced on PyPI right now, but it's reasonable to say in the future that we could say, all right, you're looking at this particular wheel. You can follow this link and go exactly see what commit SHA it was published from and when and all this stuff, or if it's missing, right, which is a strong signal that you don't know.
Yeah, that's going to be a clue, if it's missing. Yeah, yeah, that's going to be a clue. And then maybe just is there anything that you think that other ecosystems, you mentioned that, is there something in general that all the ecosystems should be sort of tackling here?
Yeah, like so I'm biased. My job is basically to figure this out for a lot of ecosystems and help them do it. I'm also biased to the Python ecosystem. It was my original home, so
Right.
we've been ahead of the curve with Python. So I think the two things that we talked about that I think every ecosystem should be doing is a two-factor mandate. I think it's 2024. Two-factor should just be everywhere basically, and that's not just true of software. That should be your bank and everything else too. And then trusted publishing. I think that's going to be the new standard for software publishing for these open repositories. I think we have to do it. It's really it mitigates so many um, potential problems and risks. So I'd like to see lots of other ecosystems support that. And they don't necessarily map directly to every ecosystem. Like for example, the crates.io, which is the equivalent of PyPI for Rust, they don't have user accounts. They sort of leverage GitHub accounts for all of their user accounts. So they don't have to worry about enacting a 2FA mandate because GitHub has already done it for them.
Right.
They have other challenges as a result of that, but like they don't have to worry about it. Similarly for trusted publishing, right? Like the Go ecosystem, they use the Go mod proxy, and that just goes and gets things from like GitHub. So there's not really a published step. There's not like built distributions and things, but there's a reason Python has it. It enables so much interesting work and workloads. So
Yeah.
the other things, like I said, attestations, build provenance, reproducibility, I think are all going to be really important for these ecosystems to focus on in the future. I'm working with a group at the OpenSSF right now. It brings together all these software repositories, and we just recently published what we're calling principles for package repository security. And this is just a list of things we think are really important and sort of the levels, and so you can sort of ratchet them up, move up the ladder in terms of repository security. And then we're also working with all these organizations to actually get these things landed in these ecosystems.
Great. Well, that's, I think, do you think that you see a future where, the way that 2FA is mandatory, that trusted publishing is a mandatory step, or just highly encouraged?
I don't know if I see a future where it's required. Maybe very far in the future, but there's enough use cases and enough people building software in legitimate ways that don't work with trusted publishing right now that I can't say that a mandate would be necessary. But I do think that it's potentially going to be the easiest way to publish. I think it is now and will be in the future as well, and just will get easier. And I also think, yeah, you're going to get a lot of security benefits, and I think maybe users will start, once we start saying what is and isn't trusted published, users might want and expect that from their open source software.
Great. Well, maybe we'll jump over and I'll do a quick demo here so we have some time for questions from folks. So I'm just going to share my screen and show what we're talking about when we talk about trusted publishing. And it is probably the easiest way to publish. So this is my account here on test.pypi, which is the sort of test environment for PyPI. And I'm already two-factor authenticated onto this. And so you can see I've got a bunch of things where I've had been doing some testing here. And oh, it's making me do my password. Okay, there we go. I remembered this device from earlier. That's why it didn't ask me for my two-factor code there. And so one of the things we can do is we have to set up a publisher, right? So this is where we're saying we can add a new pending publisher because I'm going to do a fresh project here. And you see that we can either link it to GitHub, GitLab, Google, or ActiveState. And so we'll link it to ActiveState here. And so this is the name of my thing. And so it's webinar demo, is very original little package that I made. It does amazing things like print hello world or something. And this here is, we just have to link it to my organization on the ActiveState platform. So in this case, I have an organization named after my username. And we have a project called webinar demo. And that's where we're going to publish from, and then my username. Which is the same as my organization name. For some users, their organization name might be like something like this, or, my company name or something like that. But in my case, it's just my username. And so then we can do is we'll just click add. And now a new pending publisher has been added to this webinar demo project. And we can see it down here. It's waiting for us to publish. So now over here on my laptop here, I've got basically a source tarball of my Python package. And this is just some Python package. It does something amazing for the community. It's very, very useful. And I want to get it, publish a wheel of this over to Python. So the first thing I need to do is actually push it to the ActiveState catalog. And we have a command line tool that lets you do that. And what I do is I run state publish. So the state is the ActiveState command line. And what that does is I'm putting this now into my own sort of private personal namespace, where it's just, a namespace called my packages, putting it in webinar demo. It's version 0.1. And then I have to specify a few dependencies here. But what that means is that on the active state platform, it will like know about all of the dependencies for my package. So if I had a whole bunch, what that does is creates a project that I can use for actually during my development. Because I can use this to manage the dependencies of my project during development if I wanted to. In this case, I don't have very many dependencies. It's very basic. It's built with the Flit core for the Python backend. And so it's telling me here's the information. It sort of prints out a little bit of metadata. It's detected the name is webinar demo, version is 0.1. And these are the dependencies. It's a Python, it needs Python 3, it needs the Flit core and this Python module builder. So I'm happy with that. I'm going to click yes. And so now it's published it to the platform. Now, in this case, it gives me a very specific timestamp, and this allows me to, again, this gives me a sort of snapshot of the catalog at that point. So what this means is that ultimately in the future, my build is 100% reproducible. So it basically is a snapshot at the state of the world. And so I put that into a thing called a build script, which is sort of like, think of it like a makefile. So over here in the instructions here on PyPI, sort of gives me, this is what the build script looks like. So we can look at it here because it's like nicely formatted. And it basically, I can give it the timestamp here in terms of what the catalog time is. And then I have a little bit of instructions about, where am I publishing it? Test.pypi or the main pypi.org. I can edit that. I can edit the platforms that I want to put in here. So I can say, oh, this is a Linux platform. Eventually you'll just have some nice names that you don't have to paste the UUID. The list of UUIDs is linked below there. And then just the name of the thing that I'm publishing. So in this case, it's a namespace package name here. And so if we go back over to my little terminal, you can see, I'll show you I've pre-done it so you don't have to watch me fill it out. So you can see here, I've got my build script.as with the timestamp that we just had above, as well as all these things. And so now that we have this build script, I can commit this to my project. And so committing it is just like a git commit, where now this is describing my project on the active state platform. This is the current state of it. It's using the webinar demo package and nothing else, because I'm just going to use it for pushing to PyPI. And so then what I can do is inside this, you can see I have a number of targets. So they're sort of like makefile. This, like I said, this is sort of like a makefile, and it's written in this like Python like language. It's basically Python essentially. And what I can do is I can do this one here, which executes the PyPI publisher step. And I can also do things like download the wheels individually beforehand. So let's say that I wanted to test it beforehand. I could execute the wheel build step, and the wheel build step will just build the wheel. And then I can do something. I can go and just download the wheel if I needed to run a smoke test on it or verify that it was working before I was happy. And then once I was happy with it, I could go state eval, publish receipt, and what it will do is it will evaluate this thing here and publish it over to PyPI. Hopefully it won't take too long. What I can do in the meantime is show you one that I did earlier that got published here. So we go over here. I had a webinar pre-built. So if I go to my projects, it's exactly the same. And you can see that what it did was we released it earlier, and it shows me on here that it's built the wheel file and published this directly from our active state platform. And I've got the wheel that's ready to install directly from PyPI and sort of end to end. So there's really not too many steps involved here. It's still building right now. So it builds the whole thing from source in a reproducible way, including all the dependencies. Yeah, maybe while that's going though, I'm just looking at the time. Maybe we'll switch over and see if there's any questions here in the Q&A. I do see there are um, a few questions here. So there's a question here about how do we handle machine-to-machine password rotation if applicable? I would assume it'd be handled by API tokenization.
Yeah, I think the question here is maybe about how like state and PyPI are kind of authenticating the user here. So the fun thing is there's no passwords involved. Like there are no secrets and passwords involved at all here. Basically, the identity is signed with a public key, and that's available for active state. We verify that that's a verified identity. We check a bunch of claims within that token. So it'll tell us the active state repository, user, all that stuff that Pete filled in. We verify that. The signature ensures that that has not been forged. And then if that's all checks out, we exchange that token for a regular PyPI API token. This API token is actually not quite a regular token, though. It is extremely short-lived. It only exists for about 15 minutes, and it's scoped only to what the users said they're going to do. So they're going to publish a new project only for that project and only for a short window of time. So I'm a little curious actually if Pete's build, like at what point, if it takes a little too long, that the token might not be valid. I think that it's requested right at the very end there, so it should be fine. But yeah, no passwords, no rotations or anything. Those API tokens expire automatically, so there's no risk of them. If they do get leaked, they're going to be dead in the water.
Yeah. And I think that like even there's even a difference between an existing project and the pending project, right? Like I have to get different, I have to set it up in different locations. If it's a pending, meaning it's going to create the project for me on PyPI versus it's a pre-existing project that's already been created and um, I'm going to push an update to it. Um, Okay, so there's a couple of other ones in here. Um, does trusted publishing apply to older versions of Python like 3.7? So I don't think there's any restrictions on what version of Python.
Yeah, the version of Python doesn't matter here. So you can definitely use and publish from older Python versions, publish releases for older Python versions. The thing that might make sense to be aware of is it is a relatively new thing. So tools like Twine, which you might use to publish with, various GitHub workflows, you kind of have to be on the latest version of those for them to really be able to take advantage of this. But like, if you're using the active state tool, I'm sure you also, yeah, have to be on the latest version for that to work. But other than that, yeah, the version of Python, it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, for our in our case, yeah, you have to be on the latest version of the CLI in order to get access to the commands like eval and publish, which allow you to publish to the catalog. And you can see actually it did finish here successfully. And so we can go back to my project list and project list here. And now we can see last release 1 minute ago, successful webinar demo. So yeah, it built it all from source. And then on my side over here, if I wanted to, like I was saying, if I wanted to download the wheel, I have a state artifacts command where I can ask for the wheels and it will show me the individual wheels here. So you can see that it built a mini Linux wheel here with this ID. And that allows me to, I can use this command to download. So state DL. And I can download, oops. I can use this to download the individual wheel, and then you can see it's just in my thing here, and I could install that with pip or do whatever I needed to do with that wheel in some CI process or something like that. And so, yeah, it's really quite simple. Like you said, this probably is going to be the easiest way for users to publish and most streamlined because once you get it integrated into your development process, like I was saying, is you can use the state tool and active states platform to facilitate your development in terms of managing your dependencies for your project and sort of using this almost like a CI system for building your Python packages and publishing them.
Yeah.
Um, if we
Pete,
go
the other thing
back,
you could show, I don't know if
yep,
you're going to go back to it, you can show also in the activity, security history for that package, you can show that it was trusted published as well. It will show up in your, if you go to manage project,
right, where's my managed project? Right here, yeah,
um,
sorry. And
and
I go to
security
security
history.
history.
Yeah, so that'll tell us exactly when and where it was published, but also that it was published with this OpenID token and exactly which, state project did it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great. Yeah, you can see here I was added as the project owner. Version 0.1 was created. This OpenID token was created here. That just brings me to my trusted publisher management here. Um, and yeah, so you can see the full history there as well. So it's fully auditable. Um, so yeah, it's definitely a really great way to publish those things. It says, do you have YouTube videos to follow up later? There are videos in the link that outline trusted publishing, among other things, and additional things that we can cover. We also have one more question here about our organization doesn't allow PyPI. We have an internal repo with approved packages. How might these initiatives affect our policies?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So you're kind of in the Google camp, it sounds like. There's kind of two things here. One, you're going to benefit from increased security in the way those packages that you're consuming was published. Even if you're not getting them from PyPI directly, you are getting them from PyPI at some point, right? So you're benefiting from more robust and secure publishing methods. The other thing is in the future, uh, when we make it publicly available what has been trusted published and what hasn't, this is a good signal for you when you're evaluating a new open source project, looking at new releases of something that you use and you're thinking about upgrading. If you're seeing Pete's project trusted published, and then the latest release wasn't trusted published, you can use that as a signal to say, maybe I don't want to upgrade that quite yet. Maybe you want to take a closer look. So I think that will probably also help organizations that are in that camp of they don't pull from PyPI directly, they'll still benefit from it.
So is that coming soon? The ability to see like an audit history on a package that this was published via trusted publishing versus not, and that's a future facing feature coming on PyPI.
Yeah, so two things that are coming soon with regards to that. One will, and actually, if you switch back to your PyPI tab and the project page, you'll see that we're starting to separate. If you go to the actual project itself,
Sorry, yeah, this one. Yeah.
yeah. So if you scroll down, you see there's a verified details section and an unverified details section. So um, there's actually a little bug here, but what we'll start to do is separate things that PyPI actually can verify as true. Right now, it's really just we know Pete's the maintainer. But
Yeah.
we can also soon say, this is, if you're linking to a GitHub source repository, we can say, yes, this is actually their source repository because it was published from. And so we'll start to add those details. What we'll also do is start to add a lot of details to individual files. We have we started pulling metadata out of these, and that metadata is really important as well. So we'll be displaying that, just the published status, all those kind of things in the near future. That's the idea.
Great. I think that will go a really long way for users to be able to understand what to trust and what not to.
Great.
And I think that we are pretty much at the end of our questions there. Like I said, in the deck, there's a whole bunch of links here for learning more. So you can learn about the docs that outline how to use trusted publishing. There's a couple of YouTube videos about trusted publishing, about lessons and securing your Python package ecosystem. So those are great to watch as well. And I want to say, mega thanks to Dustin for joining us today. It was great to have you. Really great conversation on this topic, and I definitely will be keeping an eye on PEP 740 there and seeing how it's progressing moving forward.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. And actually, it's been a great partner here. Really appreciate working with you over the many months it's taken to get this out. I think really, you guys have been a great partner. So really appreciate that. And yeah, thanks for bringing me on to chat.
Yeah, yeah. Well, likewise, it's been a pleasure working with you over the last number of months to get this out, and look forward to continuing to expand on the support and extending it as new capabilities come online.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, thanks everyone for joining us. You can always, go to the ActiveState platform and sign up for an account for free. You can try out our trusted publishing. There's some additional documentation about how to get started on our platform if you need to. And we'll see you at the next one.
Bye, folks.